I'm Trevor Marchand, Emeritus Professor of Social Anthropology. I consider myself both an academic, but also a maker of things.
My name's Toby Cufflin. I'm a furniture cabinet maker. I also make things.
Well, we can also say that we trained together between 2005 and 2007, which dates us, at the Building Crafts College in Stratford, in the East End of London. And it was two of the most enjoyable years of my life, and really the most gratifying field work as an anthropologist I've ever done.
No, likewise.
I was wondering if that one was for smoothing a pole, or maybe even for.
Well, it says wheelwright, so it might be like.
Oh, for the spokes. It says it's a wheelwright, eh?
I've seen something like that. Do they not run it around to create the grooves around the edges?
Oh, maybe.
No, it's not that.
No, because it would have to be the other way, wouldn't it? Yeah, because otherwise you would just run around.
I think you're right. So it's more like a dowler.
A dowler, yeah. But then what's odd about it is that this is a straight. Sorry, we just.
No. I hope you want to take a photo as well.
This section, if you were. Yeah, maybe a dowler. Or for making the. On a balustrade.
The. Spindles?
The spindles, yeah, the balustrade. Or maybe even chair legs. Is it tapered? It's tapered.
Well, that would make sense for wheelwrights, because
the
spokes,
to fit into.
They taper down to the hub, don't they? So, But whether it's or is it tapered just so the iron has got a smoother cut, so it's on an angle as it goes down.
Oh, yeah.
Because as you bring it down, you wouldn't be able to keep the same cut.
Yes. So you think that the cut is really going on here?
I think so.
And that's just to fit it and to secure it.
I think so.
Could be. Yeah.
Although this is all adjustable, isn't it? So.
It is, yeah. In a very kind of, well, in the same way that the screw there is.
Well, I think everything was kind of rudimental, because it was kind of, for previous planes like this that I've seen, they literally find any piece of iron that they can. Like, I've seen ones with even old foils, and you can see the old foiling, and they fix it and sharpen that up. Quite often, I think it was quite just a way of getting around a job. And obviously, being wooden, they wore out quite a lot. So this may not be the original. Not so much on this maybe, but these where you've got a bed or
that's
a
wood.
floor, that wears out for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are you rolling?
Yeah, rolling.
Oh, you're rolling.
Yeah.
And
made your job hard.
That was all great.
As I was saying in the talk, just historically, the plane, like a lot of the kind of the fundamental woodworking tools, has changed very, very little in design, because its function has remained the same. And as Toby said in the talk too, the function, what you need it to do, is kind of the driving factor in the way it's designed and produced. And we know that the Romans were producing planes that were very similar. A lot of them were wooden body. Some of them were wooden body with a sole. Oh yeah, didn't see that. With a sole that was made in iron, which, as Toby said earlier, well, that the box would probably have to be replaced because it would get worn down. So sometimes the wood core would be encased in iron. And some of them, in fact, there's a rare example from Pompeii, where it was in fact all made in metal. It was made in bronze, the whole piece, rather than wood. And there's one from England that was, there were Roman bench planes found in various parts of Europe, where the Romans were. And there was one that was found in Yorkshire about 25 years ago, I guess, that it was actually made, the core was made in ivory. And that's a one of a kind, but it would have been from the Roman period, so kind of early centuries AD. And that doesn't tell you just about, the material. It tells you too about the kind of exchange that was going on, because the source of ivory had to make its way up there. Probably tells you something about the social status too of the owner, the user. So it's really interesting because these planes, from what I gather from the museum notes, are probably a combination of 19th century planes prior to the collection date. I think one of them was 1887, so prior to that time, and some of them from the earlier part of the 20th century. And it's really hard just by looking at them, unless you know kind of their individual biography, it's hard to know when exactly they're made because of that continuity in style. But, Toby brought along a contemporary plane, and you can see it's all metal body. And these started to be produced, these all metal body ones, started to be produced in the mid-19th century, in fact, in the United States. The patent was bought up in the 1860s by Stanley, and who still produce planes. But what the all metal does is it gives them the weight and also the durability on the sole in particular, and so that kind of longevity. And so it gives them a kind of a ruggedness. As Toby said earlier, the wood ones, the casing, the kind of the fill might need to be replaced from time to time because you're constantly going over often rough surfaces until you get them smooth. But just before I hand over, I just want to say how interesting I think the names for the parts are and how little they've changed. Most planes through history were used by both hands. And the front handle was called the knob, and the back one was called the tote. And the tote and the knob are interesting features on a plane that could tell you a little bit about the woodworker who used them in the past, because they get shaped over time. And it's an expensive tool, and so carpenters would use them. And so just the grasps would tell you a little bit about their history of use and the carpenter's relationship to them. And also the state of the plane would tell you about how they cared for their tools or not. And that'll tell you maybe about whether their shop was a meticulous one, whether they were doing fine work, whether they were just doing kind of maybe rough joinery work, whatever. But going back to the names, it's really interesting. So you've got the knob and the tote. And then you start getting some interesting names for parts of the plane. So underneath you have what's called the sole of the plane, and that needs to really be flat and smooth because that's the part that's kneading the top of your wood, and it's kind of hitting always the high points on an uneven board, and with the blade bringing them down. And here you've got another anatomical reference. So you have the sole, you have the toe, and you have the heel of the plane to describe it. And then this opening in the bottom here is sometimes called the mouth or the throat, through which underneath the cutting iron protrudes. And the cutting iron is held in place by the cap iron.
The lever cap.
The lever cap. Should we take it off?
Yep.
Oh, good. Let's take it apart.
Let's take it apart.
Let's take it apart. So Toby's just taken off the lever cap. And then you've got the
I think we called it a chip breaker.
A chip breaker, or the cap iron.
Cap iron, yeah.
Chip breaker because, can I take it apart?
Yes, yeah. Should just lift it.
Yeah. So you've got, in fact, two separate pieces. You've got the cap iron, which is bent downwards, beveled downwards, and that's going to push your curls up when you're using it. And the cutting blade protrudes just ever so little below it, and it's beveled at a certain angle, which Toby can tell you about in sharpening.
Well, this one is beveled to 25 degrees, I think. But it's got a back bevel on it as well, purely so that when you're sharpening it, you only have to sharpen the cutting edge. And the idea is, as you sharpen it, the angle changes all the way up the top, at which point you start again. So you just change the angle slightly until you get too much of a steep angle, and then you can grind the whole thing back to 25 degrees or 20 degrees, whichever you prefer. But it just creates an easy way, a quicker way of sharpening it. Yeah.
And the angle's interesting too, because that could tell you something about the tools that you have in your collection. By looking at the angle and measuring it, you could get an idea of what kind of wood they were working with. So if you find a really steep angle, say 45 or even 50 degrees, sometimes more, then it means that they were probably working hardwoods, because a steeper angle will work quite well on some hardwoods for cleaning them up. But the 25 and 35, I guess, is pretty standard, isn't it?
It's a pretty standard. I think all of my planes are.
So this, you've got this little lever here that adjusts the blade within the mouth so that it remains parallel, perfectly parallel to the mouth opening. Because if it's tilted a little bit, it'll just eat into your wood on one side and do nothing on the other. Mm. And then you've got the frog, which can be adjusted. Its angle can be adjusted if you want it to be a little steeper. And then you've got a little adjustment mechanism here for lowering the blade through the mouth of the through the saw. So depending on how deep you want to cut in, or if you want to take really kind of thin shavings. But what I love about this kind of, the sole and the toe and the heel is this is often, you find this often, or even the frog, which is kind of, this funny shaped little bit behind. You find these anthropomorphic and bodily references in lots of tools, lots of hand tools. And I think in a way, it makes you as a user a little bit more, gives you kind of a more direct understanding because it relates to your own anatomy or to the anatomy of animals that you know, depending on its shape. And it can create I suppose, a deeper kind of respect for the tool, and a kind of an emotional attachment with it, because you treat it, in the words of some craftspeople, you treat it like a human. And if you treat your tools well, then they last, and they will work with you forever.
One thing I love about carpentry is the fact that it has been done for generations, and it's been pretty much done the same way. And we're at the end, we are at the end of hand tools, at least, of where they're going to go. But it was all taken from this, and these would have been changed until they had the right tools to do the job. And the only difference really that these have got is comfort, I think, and weight for being able to get through the material, and adjustment, and better quality steel as opposed to iron, purely for holding an edge. And the cheaper the tool, the less well the edge will stay, purely for the quality of the steel. Yeah, but that answer you?
I think it's neat sitting here too, Toby, with this one. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but it's got the blade has two hollows, two curved surfaces, and we would know right away that it was used for making a molding or a beading around something. And sometimes different circumferences of what they called hollows could be joined together within a single tool so that you could produce the kind of molding that you wanted. So this one here would tell us a little bit about what the piece of furniture, so for the edging on the piece of furniture, or perhaps a molding on an architrave or a skirting board would have looked like. And I was saying to Toby as well when we came into the room, we were both looking at this one, because I have a whole bunch of these from my deceased father-in-law, and with really interesting geometries and all different sorts, because he was a fine woodworker and made lots of moldings. It was how they made these. Did you buy them from a shop? Did you order them from a catalog? And Toby was saying that he believes that you would just make them with. So what do you think you would have cut them out with? Cutting the notches.
Cutting the notches, I think it would have been filed. I think it would have been filed.
Would have been filed. Yeah. And then how do you, you were talking before about how you sharpen your blade using, oil stones and whatever to get the bevels that you want. But how, if you're producing this with a file, the curved bit, how would you create the sharpness on it? How would you create an angle within that curve?
I suspect it was sharpened with stone, and you shape the stone to the profile, maybe.
Right. So a little piece of stone that you would angle it at, maybe, or from the.
I think so, because that's how steel's been sharpened forever, isn't it? With stone or sand. Mm-hmm. So I suspect. Only a theory.
Probably. Yeah. And what's interesting, just this is a nice example, they all are, is just, as Toby was saying, in the newer designs, everything's really firmly in place, especially with this lever cap. It just tightens your cutting iron and your cap iron in place, so it's not going to move. Once you adjust it, you might have to readjust it every once in a while, but for the most part, on doing a piece, it will it'll stay, your blade will stay in place in relation to the sole and in relation to the wood you're cutting. But in these older ones, before the production of these in the mid-19th century, when carpenters would often make their own for particular uses, they were just fitted in with, see this little wooden wedge. And so you're probably having to fix that a whole lot more often. Yeah. I mean, because, it's just going to be put in with a little mallet to secure your blade. It's such a simple tool, but incredibly useful. I see two on this one. Hindu.
Okay.
Which was probably means it was, I'm guessing, used by a British carpenter, maybe.
I think they were quite personal tools, which is why lots of them, they got stamps on the back of them, because each carpenter would, because in a workshop, I imagine you'd have lots of carpenters, and you want to keep your own tools for yourself, because you look after them, you sharpen them, you're doing a specific job. You don't want someone else coming along and ruining the edge that you've just taken an age to sharpen up. So I imagine they were quite prized, which is why they're stamped on the back.
Do you think that's the owner's mark rather than the maker of the tool?
I think the owner would have made it at this. I don't. Again, I can't speak with any. I don't think they were manufactured, so to speak.
I would agree with you. I think this is probably the owner's little print on the back. Because there weren't really many, and there are still not many manufacturers in the market. There's some really high-end, kind of artisanal bench planes that are made, like Veritas. That's Canadian, isn't it?
Yeah. And
Lee Nielsen is American. And we saw some really beautiful ones. What was the company that you and I visited in Sheffield?
Clifton.
Beautiful planes. Yeah. That was fascinating, wasn't it? Going in there, what a story to be told in the forges where they were making everything. It was like stepping back into another century, truly, in the way that they were produced. And it was nice to see things being handmade still in Sheffield, wasn't it? But just going back to what Toby was saying before, so you would have different planes for different purposes. So, we said this one is probably for creating some kind of a molding or a profile on a piece of wood. That one probably, as you said, for spindles on a rail or in a cart, for a cart wheel.
Yeah, it does say wheelwrights.
Wheelwrights. It's a real chunky piece of work, isn't it, that one?
Yeah.
What do you think the wood is?
It's definitely for turning, actually, just the way that obviously the blade is positioned. It just would have been turned around and around.
This one, to make a groove blade, is so simple. I mean, you can still see the wedge is coming, it's broken off, but it would have been, it's been holding that blade in place for God knows how long. And we called it in the workshop Granny's tooth plane, eh?
Granny's tooth. Yeah, now I think they're router planes.
Router planes, they call them.
Yeah.
Which is more politically correct. But it's interesting, again, it's that association with the human body or with a human feature that perhaps lends a certain sympathy between user and tool. But when these can also come with a kind of a fence or a guard. So they're still making tools like this to make a kind of a gouge or a groove in wood, but it'll come with a fence so that when you're running it along the side, you always have precise measurement from
it's parallel
your side. It's kind of like a Philster plane, really.
And even modern day router planes, I still use them for getting rid of high spots at the bottom of grooves, and even if you machine something, just to clean it up, they're really useful.
What do you think of that one? Rebate?
Yeah, and this is a rebate plane.
It's got its
so you've got a depth and a side fence as well, so you can. What's that?
I suppose what's interesting with that one too, in comparison with, say, this one where the mouth is in the middle, and so you've got two sides. So you're only taking off there.
I see this one's got the inlaid brass parts as well, which does that sort of.
This is quite a nicely made one.
It suggests that it's maybe more manufactured by somebody rather than self-made.
I think you're right.
It's made in oak.
Does it say what age? With the 419.
Someone with the last name of James. Just kind of printed all over the back of it. In fact, on the front of it as well. And there's something else here. Oh. So it was. It's Greenslade, Bristol.
Okay.
So whoever somebody James was obviously the owner, and like you said, marking it to make sure that the apprentice didn't come along and wreck it or somebody borrowed it. But also it looks like it would probably have been a manufacturer, which would be something interesting to look up. Who was Greenslade and where were they in Bristol and who were they selling to? And it's quite nicely made because it's made in oak. What would you say that is? Is that walnut, do you think? This wood here.
Possibly.
Is that beech?
Beech, or maybe even, I don't know whether they used yew in tool making, but very hard, isn't it?
It's very hard,
So,
yeah.
because you'd want a hard wearing timber.
I mean, and so from a museum perspective, even knowing where the what the materials were, so when you get a variation of wood like this, where were they sourcing it from, and maybe even what forest. But yeah, no, this is a nice piece. And as I was just going to say earlier, this one here, the mouth of the some wood dust just fell out. That's nice. I hope it's wood dust. The mouth is just in the it's kind of in the center, closed in on either side. But this one, because you're cutting a rebate, the blade goes right to the very end, so it's not closed in. It's because you're taking out the wood the whole way along, right to the outer surface.
I'd suggest that that's one reason, maybe for moving over to this, but also these tools would have been kept in the same environment in the workshop. They would have been completely dried out. Well, basically a door, it may have a few years of cycles, but eventually it'll stay, which is why you get these massive doors for banks and stuff that are 100 years old and they don't move. It's just because they've given up, I suppose. So I suspect that's a similar thing.
And also, yeah, I think so too. And also why they would have used hardwood.
Yeah.
They used oak, which does move, but they expands and contracts. But a block like this is a pretty sturdy block, and it's not going to move too much, is it?
No, but I suppose if they ever did move, they'd just flatten the bottom.
That's your most important part of the plane.
Yeah, as well as
Yeah, it's
Playing
really
the bottom of the plane.
playing the bottom of your plane. Yeah, because that's kind of that's your dado point. That's where everything is kind of measured in terms of flatness. And a plane is a really good reason too for thinking beyond the idea of a critical eye, because carpenters always say, well, you have to have a critical eye, and it's true. You need to kind of you check for the straightness of a piece of wood, and that you feel for it a lot. And you often will see when a carpenter is planing something, they will run their hands over it. It's the fingertips that will tell you the most about whether there's still a bump left in there. Especially when you're working on furniture and you're working on smaller components, you can feel it. And I remember Cheryl, the instructor, was saying, students need to learn to trust their perceptual senses. They need to trust their sense of touch, because it'll tell them a lot. And trying to get students to reconnect.
It's also understanding the material that you're cutting into, from grain to the hardness, because usually on a piece of wood it won't be completely straight grain, it'll kind of come out somewhere, and you want to be able to go with that, so as you're cutting it, obviously, so it doesn't dig in. But also I think with some of the longer pieces of timber, when you're working with things like
Molding plane,
rather than starting at the end and running all the way through, you might start at this end and take little bits until you go back, and then take one final sweep, purely so that you're not going into resistance. Because if you start at this end, you're always going into resistance. But if you take out the waste, so to speak, and it's the same with modern day spindle moulding. You wouldn't take a massive rebate, even though you've got the machines to do it. You'd take smaller ones to get rid of the material, for a similar kind of reason, I guess.
It was interesting just watching you reproduce the movement of using the plane. And it's when you're using a chisel, your posture is really important. And really everything kind of from the elbow down is what's controlling it. Interestingly, the non-dominant hand is often doing the more complex work because it's framing and moving what it is that you're cutting. But with planing, it's like Toby just did there. It's really a full body movement. So there's kind of a division of labor between the kind of the bottom big muscle groups, kind of, from the waist down. That's where the force is coming from. All of the fine calibration is coming from the wrist, from the elbows and the wrist and the fingers controlling it. So it's kind of a combination of force and control and a division of labor in the body as well. And that can tell you a lot too. When you look at the different kind of planes in a museum collection, in what way were they using them? When was it important to combine different kinds of different ways of bringing the plane through? Because as any of the instructors will tell a student on the first day, if you're using lots of muscle force to move the plane, then you're not using it correctly.
Yeah, you've got to let the tool do the work.
Can you talk a bit about the shavings that come off whilst you're planing? Because that's your visual kind of prompt for how well it's going, I guess, is how much is coming off, and how it's coming off, but also the feel of how it's coming off.
Yeah.
What's that interaction between your sight and the new object you're making, that is the shaving?
Yeah.
And how it's going, how well it's going.
And the smell.
And the smell.
Do
they all just come together? Is it all one experience, or are you watching for something how it's going?
I think you're right. You're watching, but also it's an indication of how sharp the tool is. The sharper it is, you can get a really nice shaving, and it will tend to, as long as the grain is favourable, it will come off in one nice, ribbon of the shaving. If it's very dull, it will just keep ripping into it, and it's a mess. So, you are constantly watching that, and its depth of cut as well. If you're going too deep, it will really dig in. You'll have big, thick shavings. But it's all about how much waste you want to remove. And you'd start off with wanting to remove quite a lot, and then you'd adjust it so that the final few passes are you're taking off minimal, and it leaves a very nice, smooth finish.
It's really gratifying, isn't it? The plane.
Yeah.
Really, really, very much so. It was, for me, it was always my favorite tool to work with was the plane. It was the whole rhythm, and when you got into the flow of it, and the grain didn't change halfway through a board, you could just go right through it like butter. It was really a pleasing thing. And I said in the talk that traditionally, and probably historically, an apprentice's instruction or a trainee's instruction begins with the plane, because they're not just learning about the tool and the material they're working with, they're also learning about their own body and the way they respond with the tool to the material, and how not to hurt themselves, but as Toby said before, let the tool do the work. And it all gets built up from there. I mean, do you remember our very first exercise that Con had us do, where we each got a block of wood, but we had to bring it down to a certain dimension?
Square it up.
Yeah, square it up.
Yeah.
Boy, did we work at that. That was
just for one little bit of wood.
We had to bring it down to a fixed depth and fixed dimensions. First with the saw, and then with our planes, and it was a wonderful, repetitive exercise that I think we actually worked on probably for the first 2 days. The first two.
Some of you know.
Some of not Mr. Expert, but yeah, the rest of us, we worked on it for a while. And I remember Con saying too, this was our instructor, I remember him saying that it wasn't just a way to familiarize new trainees because Toby came in with really, by far, the most experience in woodwork. Most of us were neophytes. And it wasn't just a way of kind of introducing us to tools and to the materials and how to use our bodies, but I remember him saying it was a testosterone buster. And, he said to kind of get all that, because you go in when you start training and, you want to prove that you can do this. And I suppose because carpentry is still very closely associated mainly with the building trades, there's maybe even a machismo to it, and you're going to go in there and you're going to work that wood. And then you find out that you don't need to do that. You don't need to hurt yourself. And you're going to get better results if you don't. And he also, I remember him saying that he was able to spot which trainees were going to stay really dedicated to the course and to learn the hand tools by watching them tackle that first project.
But also the work really is in how you can sharpen or get a tool sharp. You spend a whole day sharpening something. It'll take you a fraction of the time. No, to do the work,
but also to wreck it if you go over.
If you rush and you don't sharpen it properly, you're still there. Everyone else has finished.
Yeah. Suppose too, something to add is you've got some really kind of basic fundamental planes in the collection, particularly this. I'd call this a tri-plane and maybe quite a smoothing plane. Would you say by its size?
I'd say it's similar to that jack plane.
Think it's almost a jack plane? Yeah, maybe a jack plane, all-purpose plane, jack plane. And then you've got a couple of specialized ones, like you've got the molding one, and you've got the granny's tooth, or the grooving plane or outer plane, and then you've got the rebate plane. You've got this really interesting one for the wheelwright, but there are so many different. So depending on what a workshop specialized in, they would have a whole cast of different plane characters on their wall, and planes can, some planes can be what they call them finger planes, for really getting in there and kind of doing all the finishing work on small things like maybe toys or
musical instruments,
doorknobs or musical instruments. Yeah, and a really cool one I think is the compass plane.
Oh, where you wind it up and the bottom.
Yeah. Have you used one?
I have, and they're hard to get a grip of because all they want to do is dig in. Maybe it was just me.
I would imagine it takes a long time to master that one. It's to make kind of curved surfaces, so instrument makers will use them. Ship builders will also use them. And
you have to have a different bodily motion with that one? Or?
I would imagine, I've never used one, but I would imagine, did you feel that you needed to kind of use your body differently, or?
Yeah, I've only played with one. I haven't used it as in anger. So
you get angry, I can't imagine. But you don't see them very often. Again, it's one of these kind of specialized tools that particular carpenters, there are also a whole set of different planes for people who are ship builders to work on all the different curves and the mast. And is it a spar plane, the one for doing all the doing the rounded sides? So yeah, it's a whole world. And then there are Japanese planes. So I was talking about the motion. All Western planes, I can't think of an exception. Well, maybe that one you use differently, but it's a forward thrust with it. But a Japanese plane, like many Japanese tools, like a Japanese saw, you're pulling towards yourself. So again, if you're going to pick one up, and say, I'm going to finish because they do produce some really beautiful finishing planes, don't they?
Oh, I think Japanese tools are probably, purely they've gone a different route a lot of the time, but they do tend to be some of the best.
Some of the best.
Yeah.
But if you pick one up and you decide you're going to use it on your piece, you have to learn a new technique. And I think that's probably the fun about carpentry is kind of the almost endless array of. I mean, we've just talked about planes, but chisels. There are so many different sorts of chisels for different purposes, different kinds of saws for different functions. You could learn endlessly, and I think that's often attraction, isn't it, for carpenters? Is that
I think it is.
endless learning?
Yeah, everything's a puzzle and working out how to do it. And a tool is only to be able to get the job done. So every week I'm making some kind of jig, which does that purpose, you know. So
Could you explain succinctly, maybe it's for the purpose too of this recording, how would you describe a jig?
a jig. How would you describe a jig? A jig is a form, maybe, either to hold something or to basically execute the use of another machine, maybe, to be able to do that. I'm not explaining it very well.
No, you are. It's hard to explain because it's kind of a tool in its own right, isn't it?
I think a jig is a tool because a tool does a job. Without the jig, you wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, even in the chair that you explained in that whole assembly is a jig. It's just two forms coming together, but you wouldn't be able to make that without that. So, yeah.
And it can be as simple too, can't it, as just using a board clamped on your work table to guide your tools. So it's just a way of kind of improving the precision and guiding the tool that you're using so that it doesn't go off course. But, that jig that you produced for the chair was, that was a project in itself, wasn't it?
Well, I think that was the project. The end result just came out of it. And the thing is, with a lot of jigs, is once you've got that mould, you can reproduce that because all the work is in that. So, you can glue up more veneers and stick it in there and you'll have two jigs.